What's up, everybody? In today's video, we are going to jump right in to Chad Daybell's lawyer's opening statement. It's not going to be a long clip. It's only about 10 or 15 minutes of his opening statement, but boy, does he take some shots that we didn't know if they were coming. We guessed, we thought maybe they'd point the finger at each other. It seems like Lori Vallow threw her body in front of that during her trial, not Chad Daybell. The state attorney's opening statement is very similar to the Lori Vallow case. They're going after Chad Daybell for very similar crimes, for very similar reasons. But Chad Daybell's defense is very different than Lori Vallow's. And that's what we're going to get into in today's video. We are going to jump right in. This is John Pryor, Chad Daybell's attorney, and he is here telling Chad Daybell's story. The beginning few minutes of opening that we skipped is how great of a guy Chad Daybell is. He's an author, children's books, some religious books, mostly fiction. Yeah, he's got some weird beliefs, and he writes about light and dark. And, we might not all agree with his beliefs, but they're just books. He just wrote those books. Everything in his life was fine. He didn't have so much as a speeding ticket until Lori Vallow came in his life. Now, if you remember Lori Vallow's closing, there was some inclination of this, that everything was fine until Chad Daybell came into her life, and Chad Daybell was the big problem. But she seemed to get upset by that, and it wasn't their full defense from the jump and from the beginning of trial. Well, that's very different for Chad Daybell and his attorney, John Pryor. This is opening statement, and from the jump, they're letting us know their defense is it was all Lori Vallow and Alex Cox, her brother. So let's listen in.
The testimony went off will show you. I think he had a speeding ticket in 2005. The Lori Vallow was a different story.
So basically, the worst thing that happened to Chad Daybell is he got a speeding ticket in 2005. I apologize for how bad the audio is in the courtroom. I've boosted it a little bit, so hopefully it's loud enough, but it's kind of gurgly. Judge Boyce is in control of these cameras. It's not going to be a cinematic show, but at least we get to watch it and hear it real time together, unlike Lori Vallow's, where it was just audio. Same judge, same jurisdiction. One has cameras, one doesn't, for different reasons that we've discussed on other videos. Check out our playlist on our YouTube page if you guys want to hear more about whether or not cameras would be in the courtroom and why. But Lori Vallow is a very different story.
Lori Vallow was someone who, right out of high school, married her first husband. You hear testimony about this. That marriage was very short-lived. Very short-lived. She then married husband number 2 a few years later. And again, very short-lived marriage. And there's some testimony indication that there were some problems with the marriage that caused the breakup. But the theme seems to be that Lori's brother Alex, and you're going to hear about Alex Cox. Alex Cox was Lori's protector. Alex Cox would do anything and everything to protect, aid, and assist Lori Vallow whenever her endeavors.
So bringing Alex Cox in, accusing Lori Vallow and Alex Cox basically of being the bad guys, and there's going to be more coming. But a lot of this sounds like it's from some true crime channels. Like he's buying into some of these narratives. Maybe he's heard what people have said. Maybe he's attaching to some of them. Maybe the public and the reporting and the media is going to catch up to some of this and catch on to some of this and jump on board that it was all Lori Vallow. She's the bad guy. Alex Cox, he's the bad guy. Not Chad Daybell. He was just duped by her beauty and seduction.
Unbridled question. Anything. And if Alex Cox even perceived that there was a problem, Alex Cox reacted. You're going to hear testimony that in 2007, I believe it was August of 2007, Lori Vallow had finished up going through her third marriage with Joseph Ryan. It was a tumultuous, you'll hear testimony that it was a tumultuous marriage, a terrible marriage. And Lori Vallow made accusations against Joseph Ryan of abusing their child Tylee. Yes, the same Tylee. And during one of the visits in 2007, folks, and I want to tell you, you're going to hear testimony that in 2007, Chad Daybell didn't even know Lori Vallow existed. But Alex Cox, after one of the exchanges and visitations with Tylee, Alex Cox approached Joseph Ryan and shot him with a taser and assaulted him. Was eventually charged with aggravated assault, was eventually put in jail, and had this on his record. And there was representation, the facts would suggest that at the time Joseph Ryan feared for his life. This was a serious situation. But it set the pattern for what we're dealing with Alex Cox. Whenever there was a problem or a threat to Lori Vallow, you'll hear testimony that Alex Cox came to the rescue. But Alex Cox would run without even question. It did never was necessary to solve Lori Vallow's problems. We're going to fast forward then to 2019. Lori Vallow is still married to Charles Vallow. And the prosecuting attorney mentioned this. Yes, Chad Daybell at that point, coming in January, February, started to have communications with Lori Vallow. And yes, folks, it turned into an inappropriate relationship. 2019 forward. And yes, he was engaging in discussions. He was engaging in contact with her. All of
Yeah, he was. We're going to hear about some of those discussions, but he's got to admit inappropriate relationship. Okay, he shouldn't have done that, but he didn't kill anybody. He didn't hurt anybody. You know who did hurt people? You know who is accused of killing people? Lori Vallow and Alex Cox. The strategy of going second and having all this pile up on Lori Vallow and being able to point the finger at Alex Cox, maybe it was a good strategy after all. I always thought the best strategy, the only chance either of them really had to win was point the finger at each other. That we said that from the beginning. We talked about joint defense agreements. I think my dad came on and talked about it. We've done a ton of videos on Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. I encourage anybody new to the channel to go check those out. But this was always the best argument. And frankly, kudos to him for doing it. Because if this is the truth, and this is what his client's telling him, that I had nothing to do with this, I have no idea, everything in my life went downhill when I met this seductive, beautiful lady named Lori Vallow, well, that is absolutely the best argument and the best defense. Because nobody's going to believe that they don't know what happened. Somehow the kids end up in Chad Daybell's backyard and Lori Vallow is telling all these lies about, what's going on, and they're collecting Social Security. Lori is collecting Social Security and things like that. So again, this to me is the story that tracks the most.
the things that the prosecutor talked about in terms of a relationship. But subsequent to the seriousness of this relationship getting rolling, Alex Cox was at a visitation in 2019 with Charles Vallow. And Lori Vallow was there. Tiny Ryan was there. JJ was there. They were all present. And during that altercation and that supposed visit, much like with Joseph Ryan, Alex Cox took out a gun and shot Charles Vallow. And then after calling 911, he then finished the job and walked up to him at close range.
Now, all of those facts are basically agreed to. Now, at that point, it was self-defense, and Alex Cox passed. So I don't think he's ever been convicted of anything with Charles Vallow. Lori Vallow, we know, has been indicted and is going to be tried for that. But he can say those facts as truth, leave out the self-defense part, how he pulled the trigger, he finished the job, all things like that for Lori Vallow. He can tell the story in that slanted way because he believes that's how the facts are going to be presented. And is the state going to prove it was self-defense? Are they going to say Lori didn't do anything wrong? No, Chad Daybell's not charged with anything like that. So there are facts to support more bad news from Lori Vallow and Alex Cox that don't connect to Chad Daybell. Now, how are they going to deal with the Tammy stuff? Right? That's also part of this. But again, building up the big bad guy as Lori Vallow and Alex Cox, that's the move for them at this point. It's confirmed with this opening statement.
Now, you're going to hear testimony that in some way Chad Daybell was implicated in that. And you're going to hear further testimony that he was not. You're going to hear testimony and see documentation that suggests that the prosecuting attorney on review of this indicated that there was no likelihood of conviction of Chad Daybell. You'll hear testimony that Chad Daybell had nothing to do with the execution by Alex Cox, Charles Vallow. And the same for Brandon Boudreaux. You will hear that Chad Daybell is not being pursued for any involvement in Brandon Boudreaux attempted murder.
To think that the judge was not going to allow them to sever these trials is crazy to me. If this was going to be their argument, you have to sever these trials. You got to have two different juries. You got to have two different arguments. I get the wasted resources and time. You have to sever these trials. And this is the same things I was saying back when they were filing these motions to sever and they got denied multiple times and eventually ended up getting granted because Lori Vallow demanded speedy trial. Chad Daybell begged for a continuance. And that was good lawyering. I know a lot of people don't like John Pryor. I don't know that he's like a great presenter, speaker, or trial lawyer, but a lot of the things he's done to this point give Chad Daybell his best shot at trial, which is all you can ask for. It doesn't mean he's going to win. I mean, I think he's going to lose. I think this is a really tough trial, but he's at least giving him his best shot. And I think he's sitting over there by himself with all those state attorneys, investigators, all those people helping out the state. And I think he's got an investigator and maybe some people, but it looks like a much smaller team for the defense. The David versus Goliath story, I think he's going to play into that.
Those occurred, and those are separate, as well as Charles Vallow. So what we have is we have a situation where someone who's 29 years old, Chad Daybell, 29 years of marriage with Tammy Daybell, no discernible issues in his life. And then Lori Vallow comes in the picture, Miss Texas. You'll hear testimony about this beautiful, vivacious woman, very sexual person, and very manipulative.
So Chad Daybell is just this ho-hum guy, and then Miss Texas walks in. Lori Vallow. Beautiful, seductive, sexual, manipulative. I don't remember if he said seductive. Sexual, manipulative. He's painting her as about as the big bad wolf, as much as anybody can paint somebody that way in an opening statement. Who's going to testify that this is how she was when she came in his life? It's going to be interesting.
And she knows how to get what she wants. And she drew Chad Daybell into a relationship, and an unfortunate relationship, that Chad fell into. After that, things started rolling, issues started happening, but eventually, yes, there was a murder, and there was a burial. And you've heard discussion about the backyard of Chad Daybell. Well, we have a 4.5-acre farm in Fremont County, Idaho. And you'll hear testimony that the body of J.J. Vallow was discovered behind an irrigation pond and a tree out in the pasture. So technically, yes, maybe the backyard, but more accurately described as the pasture, hidden behind a tree. You're going to hear testimony that also in the middle of this pasture was a raspberry patch, former raspberry patch, that was then turned into a place for them to bury the cats, the dogs, and all of the animals on the farm. Okay? Again, out in the pasture of the field and not the backyard. You'll hear testimony about that. You're going to hear from 4 experts that I'm going to bring forward. And these 4 experts, the first one is going to be Dr. Greg Hampikian. And Dr. Hampikian is a bit of a notable local from Boise State University. And Dr. Hampikian is a DNA expert, considered one of the best DNA experts. He's been involved in has significant work that he's done on both the defense and for the prosecution. He was involved and led the team with Amanda Knox in Italy that got her exonerated because of the DNA evidence. He has substantial experience. And anybody or anyone who knows anything about DNA goes to Dr. Hampikian first, because he is the guy. And Dr. Hampikian is going to talk a little bit about the DNA evidence that's found on the scene. Dr. Hampikian is going to talk about the fingerprint on the plastic that J.J. Vallow was discovered in. Was that of Alex Cox? Dr. Hampikian is...
Again, they've got DNA evidence. They're going to have the expert of all experts in DNA evidence come and testify. The fingerprint was Alex Cox. They're building up these 2 big bad guys, alternative defense theory, alternative defendant, alternative bad guy. Somebody else did it, pointing the finger. They don't have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They just have to make it a reasonable doubt that it was Chad Daybell. And there's some evidence that obviously Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were involved in this. And maybe they can use this to exonerate Chad Daybell.
Is going to talk about the hair sample that was found on the plastic of Alex Cox, and that it was Lori Vallow.
We got Alex Cox's fingerprint, Lori Vallow's hair.
Dr. Hampikian is going to talk about several, and I mean several other hairs that were found on the plastic of J.J. Vallow. But he's also going to say that there was no DNA evidence, no hair sample of Chad Daybell on Tyler Ryan or on J.J. Vallow. You're then going to hear from Dr. Raven.
It's not this ho-hum, going to get bulldozed. And again, say whatever you want about him, say whatever you want about Chad Daybell. But we've watched a lot of trials where lawyers get up there, including Lori Vallow's trial, basically apologize for being there, admit that their client's horrible, say their job is so difficult, nobody wants this job to, represent these bad guys, have no cognizable defense, no arguments to be made. Now, maybe some of their hands were tied by their clients. I don't know. But that's not what we have here. He's putting on a defense. He's got a cogent argument. He's got somebody to point to. He's got some DNA evidence that's going to help him. We know the state's got a lot of evidence. We know they're going to put a mountain forward, and it's going to be very hard to overcome. But he's doing his job. He's defending his client. You may not like his style. You may not like his client. But at least I feel like watching this opening statement, he's going to try throughout this trial.
Raven is a forensic pathologist, and she's going to talk a little bit about the circumstances surrounding Tammy Daybell. And what Dr. Raven is going to say is that there's no indication that this is either a homicide or any other crime, and that the only conclusion she can come to is you can't determine what the cause of death was.
They're not going to blame the Tammy Daybell stuff on Lori Vallow or Alex Cox. They're just going to say it was an accidental death, which it was originally categorized as so. So they're going to go with that. So they've got an explanation for everything, right? Which you have to as a defendant.
There's no way to determine it. Tammy Daybell was buried. You'll hear testimony about that. And then a short time later, the police officers showed up and they dug her body up after she'd been married, after she was laid to rest, and then continued after the body was pulled out of the ground and continued to examine it for whatever they were looking for. And what you're going to find is based on that, Dr. Raven's going to say you can't determine what the cause of death is. You're going to hear testimony from the Daybell children. from the children themselves. 4 of the 5 children, I think, three or 4 of the 5 children. They're going to talk about their mother's health struggles. They're going to talk about their mother's use of various medicinal treatments that she would use.
I believe we've seen interviews where the kids still think it's all Lori Vallow and not Chad Daybell, which again would fit right in. I don't know if all of them, but it sounds like they're going to have at least some testify on their father's behalf, which I think is a big deal and much more than Lori Vallow had. I mean, this is a much better case than Lori Vallow has. When Lori Vallow had a 0% chance of winning, Chad Daybell probably has, so much better of a chance, maybe 1%, maybe 2%. Better than 0.
Oils that she would put on her leg, medicine and different herbs that she would take, and that her mother was suffering from, a number of maladies, and that she would refuse to go see a doctor or get it treated. And Dr. Ravens going to enlighten you a little bit about some of the circumstances regarding Tammy Daybell. You're then going to hear from Patrick Eller. He's a forensic digital data examiner. And Patrick Eller is someone who has spent his life in the military working for various agencies, and we'll talk a little bit about that, within the government to do data retrieval and data research. And he's going to talk a little bit about the phone records that are involved in this case. He's going to specifically talk about the travels of Alex Cox, because you are going to hear testimony that Alex Cox went to Chad Daybell's property on the 9th of September. You're going to hear that Alex Cox approached Chad Daybell's property a half a dozen other, 5 or 6 other times. You're going to hear testimony that Alex Cox was there on the 23rd. And you're going to hear where Alex Cox was in a number of other times and places in his whereabouts and his travels.
They're using all the forensic evidence, cell phone data to prove, basically, they're prosecuting this case against Alex Cox and Lori Vallow. It's really what it sounds like.
For about a 2.5 month period. And Patrick is going to, offer you some information and data to support all of that. And finally, you're going to hear from a forensic anthropologist, and his name is Eric Bartlett. And Mr. Bartlett is going to talk to you a little bit about the nature and the nature of how the remains of Tylee were burned. Eric Bartlett is going to talk to you a little bit about the lack of complete skeletal remains and why, when Tylee was laid down on the ground, there was not a complete set of skeletal remains. In fact, there were a number of pieces of that were missing. You're going to hear a lot of evidence, and the judge has talked to us a little bit about not making a decision until you hear all of the evidence. And there's a specific jury instruction that talks about that. The jury instruction is, consider all the evidence. Listen to the instructions from the court on how you're to proceed. Listen to the arguments of the prosecuting attorney and the defense, and then and only then do you make your decision. And at the conclusion of all that evidence, and at the conclusion of the judge's instructions, the arguments of both the defense attorneys, I'm going to ask you folks to return the verdict not guilty. Thank you, folks. Thank you for your time.
That was it. A lot to say. A lot of things they are kind of creating a burden that they're going to have to prove, which I think kind of is their best bet. You guys let me know. What would be a better argument for Chad Daybell based on what we know? Doesn't mean he's going to win, but it means his lawyer's got an argument. He's got something to present to the jury. They're going to have something to think about. Again, I think it's an incredible uphill battle for him, but I'm interested to watch. I'm very interested to watch to see how this goes, because it seems like it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a battle. It's going to be a well-fought trial. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know where you're leaning. And we'll continue to follow this case. If you guys are interested, and you can let me know you're interested by hitting that like button, commenting in the live chat, in the comment section, and making sure you subscribe to our page and hit that reminder bell, because if we do follow this trial, you won't want to miss any of the videos that we have recapping and reacting to the events throughout the trial. Thanks so much for joining me. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.